What if the universe is not just something you live in, but something that is, in some incomprehensible way, aware that you exist inside it? For centuries, we have treated the cosmos as a silent stage, a vast mechanical arena filled with galaxies, stars, black holes, and empty space. We have described it with equations, mapped it with telescopes, and simulated its birth with supercomputers. But what if all of that only scratches the surface? What if consciousness, the very thing allowing you to hear these words right now, is not an accidental byproduct of chemistry, but a fundamental property of reality itself? Across universities in America and around the world, physicists, neuroscientists, and philosophers are quietly revisiting a question once dismissed as mystical. Is the universe itself a living, conscious thing? Not in the way humans are conscious, not with thoughts or emotions as we understand them, but in a deeper, structural sense, as an interconnected system where awareness may be woven into space-time itself. Some of the brightest scientific minds are exploring ideas that challenge materialism, blur the line between observer and observed, and suggest that consciousness may not arise from the universe, but that the universe arises with consciousness built into its foundation. Tonight, we explore the theory that is blowing scientists' minds, and by the end you may never look at the night sky the same way again. Before we begin, if you enjoy calm, thought-provoking science journeys that explore the deepest mysteries of existence, consider subscribing and gently supporting the channel. It truly helps keep these quiet explorations alive. If this topic fascinates you, leave a like. It lets the algorithm know you enjoy contemplative science content. And I'd love to hear from you. Which part of the United States are you listening from tonight? The East Coast, Midwest, California, Texas, somewhere under clear desert skies? Leave a comment and let me know. Now let us begin. For most of modern scientific history, the universe has been described as fundamentally unconscious. Matter moves according to physical laws. Particles interact. Stars ignite and collapse. Galaxies merge. All of it unfolds through gravity, electromagnetism, nuclear forces, and quantum fields. Consciousness, in this view, is a latent fragile accident, something that emerged billions of years after the Big Bang, on at least one small planet orbiting an ordinary star in an unremarkable galaxy. This narrative is powerful because it aligns with the scientific revolution: strip away myth, measure reality, and explain everything through physical mechanisms. Yet there remains a profound puzzle at the center of this framework: the so-called hard problem of consciousness. While neuroscience has mapped brain regions, traced neural circuits, and identified electrochemical patterns associated with thought, no equation has yet explained why subjective experience exists at all. Why does information processing feel like something from the inside? Why is there an inner movie playing behind your eyes instead of pure darkness? The philosopher David Chalmers famously articulated this dilemma, distinguishing between the easy problems of consciousness, such as how the brain integrates sensory data, and the hard problem why any of it should be accompanied by experience. This gap has led some thinkers to propose a radical shift. Instead of assuming consciousness emerges from complex arrangements of matter, what if consciousness is a fundamental property of reality, much like mass or charge? This idea, known broadly as Panpsychism, suggests that some form of proto-awareness exists at every level of physical existence. Under this framework, elementary particles may not think or feel in any human sense, but they might possess the most primitive glimmer of interiority, a basic experiential quality. When particles combine into atoms, atoms into molecules, molecules into neurons, and neurons into brains, these micro-experiences could integrate into the rich consciousness we recognize. To many scientists, this sounds speculative, yet it attempts to address a genuine explanatory gap. If consciousness arises from purely non-conscious ingredients, one must explain how subjective experience emerges from something entirely devoid of it. Panpsychism avoids this leap by suggesting that experience is built into the universe from the start. Interestingly, certain developments in physics have also revived questions about the role of the observer. In quantum mechanics, measurement plays a peculiar role. Particles exist in superpositions of possible states until observed or measured, at which point they appear to collapse into definite outcomes. Interpretations differ, and many physicists do not believe human consciousness causes collapse, but the mathematics reveals a strange entanglement between observation and physical reality. The act of measurement cannot be cleanly separated from the system being measured. The observer is not fully outside the experiment. This insight has led some theorists to speculate whether consciousness and quantum processes are more deeply intertwined than classical physics would suggest. While mainstream physics remains cautious, the philosophical implications are profound. If the universe requires observation to fully actualize certain states, then the boundary between subject and object becomes blurred. The cosmos is not merely out there, it participates in a relational process with observers within it. Beyond quantum theory, cosmology itself has revealed surprising forms of large-scale organization. The universe is not a random scattering of galaxies but a vast cosmic web, with filaments stretching across hundreds of millions of light-years, connecting clusters like neural pathways in a brain. While this resemblance is mostly structural and metaphorical, some researchers have explored statistical similarities between neural networks and cosmic matter distribution. Both systems exhibit complex connectivity patterns governed by simple underlying rules. The universe, at its largest scale, processes energy, transfers information, and evolves over time. It has a history. It changes, it responds to internal dynamics. In that sense, it behaves like a system. The question then arises, can a sufficiently complex system exhibit something analogous to awareness? Another influential framework comes from information theory. Physicist John Archibald Wheeler proposed the idea of from bit, suggesting that physical reality fundamentally arises from information. In this view, particles and fields are secondary to informational relationships. If the universe is fundamentally informational, and if consciousness is deeply tied to information processing, then perhaps the separation between mind and matter is not as absolute as once assumed. Contemporary theories such as integrated information theory, developed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi, attempt to quantify consciousness in terms of how much information a system integrates. According to this theory, any system that integrates information in a sufficiently unified way possesses some degree of consciousness. While primarily applied to brains, the framework invites provocative questions. Could large-scale systems, ecosystems, planetary systems, or even the universe itself, integrate information in a manner that meets minimal criteria for awareness? Most scientists would argue that current evidence does not support such a conclusion. Yet the fact that the question can be framed in mathematical terms marks a significant shift from purely mystical speculation. There is also the anthropic principle, which notes that the physical constants of the universe appear finely tuned to allow the emergence of life in observers. If gravity were slightly stronger or weaker, if the electromagnetic force differed by small margins, complex chemistry might be impossible. Some interpret this as evidence of multiverse selection, while others see it as an invitation to deeper inquiry about why the universe has properties that permit consciousness to arise at all. If the cosmos were entirely indifferent to awareness, why should it be structured in a way that generates it? One response is that in a vast multiverse, we simply find ourselves in one of the rare universes compatible with life. Another possibility, more controversial, is that consciousness is not an afterthought but a built-in feature of cosmic evolution. Importantly, none of these ideas imply that the universe thinks in sentences, forms intentions, or possesses personality traits. The concept of a conscious universe, as explored in scientific context, is far subtler. It concerns whether awareness, in its most abstract form, might be woven into the mathematical structure of reality. It asks whether subjectivity could be as fundamental as space and time. As Theodore the researcher gently guides us through this exploration, it is essential to maintain scientific humility. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. No experiment has yet demonstrated that the universe as a whole has subjective experience, but neither has science fully explained how subjective experience arises within the universe. That open space between explanation and mystery is where inquiry lives. In the United States and around the world, interdisciplinary conversations are growing between physicists, philosophers, cognitive scientists, and complexity theorists. These discussions are not about replacing physics with mysticism, but about expanding our conceptual toolkit. The scientific method remains central. Hypotheses must be testable, predictions must be measurable, and models must be falsifiable. Yet history teaches us that radical ideas sometimes begin at the edges. The notion that Earth orbits the Sun once seemed outrageous. The idea that time slows down at high speeds once sounded absurd. Today they are textbook physics. Whether the universe is conscious in any meaningful sense remains unknown, but the question itself forces us to confront deeper assumptions about matter, mind, and reality. Are we isolated pockets of awareness in a fundamentally dead cosmos? Or are we localized expressions of a deeper, more universal property? In this first chapter, we do not claim answers. Instead, we map the intellectual terrain. We examine the hard problem of consciousness, the observer effect in quantum mechanics, the informational structure of reality, and the possibility that awareness may be more than a biological accident. As we continue into, we will explore more structured scientific proposals, from Panpsychism to simulation theory, and evaluate what evidence might one day distinguish poetic metaphor from physical truth. For now, as you sit quietly beneath your ceiling or beneath open American skies, consider this: the atoms in your brain were forged in ancient stars. The laws governing your neurons are the same laws governing distant galaxies. You are not separate from the universe, you are an arrangement of it, briefly aware. And whether that awareness is a solitary spark in a dark expanse, or part of something far greater, remains one of the most profound questions humanity has ever asked. Imagine for a moment that every star you see tonight is not just burning gas, not just nuclear fusion tearing atoms apart, but part of something larger, something that might, in a way we barely understand, be aware. Not aware like you and me, not thinking in words or emotions, but aware in the way a vast ocean is aware of its own tides. What if the universe is not a cold, indifferent stage where life accidentally emerged, but a living system within which consciousness is not an anomaly, but a fundamental feature? For centuries, we have asked whether we are alone in the universe, but perhaps we have been asking the wrong question. Perhaps the deeper question is this: are we alone in something that is itself alive? Tonight, we continue our journey into one of the most mind-expanding theories ever seriously considered by philosophers, physicists, and neuroscientists alike: the possibility that the universe is, in some sense, conscious, not metaphorically, not spiritually, but physically, structurally, and fundamentally. If that idea feels radical, it should. Because if it's true, it changes everything. How we understand reality, how we understand ourselves, and even how we understand the future of science. Before we continue, if you're drawn to these deep explorations of cosmology and consciousness, consider subscribing, liking the video, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. And I'd genuinely love to know, what part of the United States are you watching from? Whether it's California, Texas, New York, Florida, or somewhere in between, leave a comment and let us know where you're joining from. It's fascinating to see this quiet community of thinkers stretching across the country. The scientific frameworks that have unexpectedly reopened this ancient question. For much of the 20th century, science seemed to push consciousness into a narrow corner. It was treated as a byproduct of brain chemistry, a side effect of neurons firing in complex networks. The prevailing assumption was clear: consciousness is local. It is biological. It arises only when matter organizes itself in very specific ways inside a skull, the universe itself silent, mechanical, unaware. But over the past few decades, cracks have begun to appear in that certainty. The first crack comes from physics itself. At the smallest scales of reality, the universe behaves in ways that defy our classical intuitions. Quantum mechanics tells us that particles do not possess definite properties until they are measured. Electrons exist in probability waves, superpositions of possibilities, until an observation occurs. This measurement problem has haunted physicists since the early 20th century. What counts as a measurement? Does it require a conscious observer? Or can any interaction collapse a wave function? Different interpretations of quantum mechanics offer different answers, but some of them, like the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation, suggest that consciousness may play a fundamental role in determining physical reality. Now, we must tread carefully. The idea that consciousness collapses the wave function has often been exaggerated or misunderstood in popular media. Most physicists do not argue that human thoughts create reality in a magical sense. However, the deeper issue remains unresolved. The line between observer and observed is not as clear as classical physics once assumed. In quantum theory, the observer cannot be cleanly separated from the system being observed. This blurring of boundaries has led some thinkers to ask a daring question: if observation is fundamental to reality, could consciousness be woven into the structure of the cosmos itself? Parallel to developments in physics, neuroscience has been grappling with what philosopher David Chalmers famously called the hard problem of consciousness. While we can map brain activity, identify neural correlates of experience, and understand how sensory information is processed, We still cannot explain why physical processes give rise to subjective experience at all. Why does neural activity feel like something from the inside? Why is there a first-person perspective? This explanatory gap has resisted reduction for decades, and it has forced some scientists to consider alternatives that were once dismissed as metaphysical speculation. One of those alternatives is panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is not something that suddenly appears at a certain level of complexity, but rather a fundamental property of matter, like mass or charge. According to modern versions of panpsychism, even elementary particles may possess extremely primitive forms of experience. Not thoughts, not emotions, but some minimal aspect of what it is like to be that particle. Under this view, complex consciousness, like human awareness, emerges from combinations of these simpler experiential units. Critics often react strongly to panpsychism, seeing it as an unnecessary leap. But its proponents argue that it may actually be the simplest solution to the hard problem. Instead of trying to derive consciousness from non-conscious matter, a move that has repeatedly failed, it treats consciousness as a basic feature of reality. In this sense, the universe would not merely contain pockets of awareness, it would be composed of proto-awareness at every level. Another scientific framework that intersects with this idea is integrated information theory, or ET, developed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi. ET proposes that consciousness corresponds to the degree of integrated information within a system. In simple terms, a system is conscious to the extent that it forms a unified, irreducible whole whose internal states cannot be decomposed without losing essential information. The brain, with its vast network of interconnected neurons, scores high on this measure, but IT does not restrict consciousness to biological systems. In principle, any sufficiently integrated system, even certain artificial intelligences or complex physical structures, could possess some degree of experience. Here is where the idea becomes truly cosmic. If consciousness corresponds to integrated information, then we can ask, does the universe itself form an integrated system? On large scales, the cosmos exhibits intricate networks. Galaxies cluster into filaments and superclusters, forming a web-like structure often called the cosmic web. Dark matter scaffolds this vast network, guiding the formation of galaxies over billions of years. Some researchers have noted that the structure of the cosmic web bears a surprising resemblance to neural networks in the brain. Of course, similarity in structure does not automatically imply similarity in function, but it raises provocative questions. If integration and complexity are key ingredients of consciousness, could the universe as a whole meet those criteria? There is also the field of systems theory, which views the universe as a dynamic, self-organizing system. From the emergence of stars to the formation of life, complexity appears to increase over cosmic time. The universe is not static, it evolves, it generates structure, it gives rise to chemistry, biology, intelligence. In a purely mechanistic worldview, this is simply the outcome of physical laws acting on initial conditions. But in a more holistic framework, one might ask whether this tendency toward complexity reflects something deeper, an intrinsic drive toward awareness. We must be cautious not to anthropomorphize. When we speak of a living universe, we are not suggesting that the cosmos has intentions, desires, or emotions in the human sense. The term living here is metaphorical, pointing to qualities like self-organization, adaptation, and systemic unity. However, if consciousness is indeed fundamental, then what we call life might be a localized intensification of a universal property. Another angle comes from cosmology itself. The observable universe appears finely tuned for the emergence of complexity in life. Constants such as the strength of gravity, the electromagnetic force, and the cosmological constant fall within narrow ranges that allow stars to form and heavy elements to be synthesized. Some explain this fine-tuning through the multiverse hypothesis. If countless universes exist with different parameters, we naturally find ourselves in one that permits observers. But others wonder whether fine-tuning hints at a deeper principle, perhaps one in which the universe is structured in a way that naturally gives rise to consciousness, because consciousness is not an accident, but an expression of its underlying nature. The anthropic principle states that the universe must be compatible with the conscious life that observes it. On its own, this principle is a selection effect, not a proof of cosmic consciousness, but it subtly reframes our perspective. The universe is not just something we observe, it is something that has evolved observers within itself. In that sense, the cosmos has become aware of its own existence through us. As astronomer Carl Sagan once said, we are a way for the universe to know itself. That poetic statement, when examined closely, may carry more scientific weight than we initially realize. If we step back, we notice a pattern. Quantum mechanics blurs the boundary between observer and observed. Neuroscience struggles to reduce consciousness to matter. Panpsychism proposes that awareness is fundamental. Integrated information theory suggests that consciousness correlates with systemic integration. Cosmology reveals a universe capable of generating increasing complexity and self-reflection. None of these fields alone proves that the universe is conscious, but together they reopen a question that modern science once thought it had closed. There are, of course, powerful objections. Some argue that invoking cosmic consciousness explains nothing, it merely shifts the mystery to a larger scale. Others warn against conflating metaphor with mechanism. Science demands testability, and a universe-wide consciousness is extraordinarily difficult to measure or falsify. These criticisms are valid and must be taken seriously. The strength of this inquiry lies not in blind belief, but in disciplined curiosity, and so does not conclude with certainty. Instead, it expands the landscape. The idea that the universe might be a living, conscious thing is no longer confined to mystical traditions or speculative philosophy. It is being examined, carefully, cautiously, within the language of physics, neuroscience, and systems theory. Whether future discoveries will strengthen or dismantle this possibility remains unknown. But the very fact that the question can now be asked within scientific discourse marks a profound shift. As we move forward, we will explore even deeper implications. If the universe possesses some form of consciousness, what does that mean for free will? For artificial intelligence? For the ultimate fate of reality itself? The journey is far from over. In fact, we may only be at the threshold of understanding something that has been hiding in plain sight since the first human looked up at the stars and felt, inexplicably, that the darkness was not entirely empty.